welcome back to Property Matters on Dublin South FM and on iPropertyRadio with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on social media at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. This week, I'm chatting to one of our favourite returning guests, Christina Buckley, developer and consultant. Christina, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Carol. Yes, thank you for having me back.
Christina, there's shows that we do, and there's ones that sometimes don't get the traction among the audience that you think it might. And yours was one that got huge traction. It's one in terms of the last time we discussed investing in property through your pension. And honestly, as somebody who has been in the industry for 20 years and struggled to understand this, you really made it very, very simple to understand. But actually, we touched on some of the development projects that you're involved in yourself personally, and that really captured people's imagination, because despite everything else out there, despite the well-known challenges and well-publicized challenges, there are people who just have a fascination around this and who see opportunities around them and just don't know where to start. It seems like a huge hurdle just to get started in property development. So I was hoping that we could really delve into that today a bit. First of all, tell me about some of the projects that you're involved in at the moment.
Well, just I suppose to cover off the pension, we're a year into that, and pension properties are doing well. The property values are holding, the rents are good. They've been between 5 and 10% rental yields over the last year. Now the market, on the other hand, has had a bit of a downturn. A lot of people will know it's sort of 15-20%, but then that is after years of growth, and these things cannot be compared. You cannot compare like with like. So property is considered an unregulated asset, which is hard to liquidate. So you have to sell it if you want to liquidate it, and that can be a risk. So there's also rising prices and interest rate hikes. So those yields could come under pressure.
Christina, before we move on to interest rates, because that's a huge one at the moment, did you say that you're seeing property down 10 to 15%?
No, so I was saying that basically the market, so basically your stocks and bonds and shares and your ETFs is down about 15-20% over the last year. But that's been after a number of years of growth. These things are always time in the market rather than timing the market. And I'm not trying to compare property with stocks and bonds and shares, because they're totally different things. It wouldn't be a like for like comparison. But just to say, on the pension side of things, and given that it's the anniversary since we spoke, well, it's just the year, we have done a review on that with the pension trustees, and in relation to the rental properties, he was saying to me that they are doing between 5 and 10% is the sort of average on the rental yields. Now that may come under pressure in the next year, because you're going to have, obviously the interest rates are rising, and then the values of the buy the property is getting more expensive. So both of those things will put pressure on the rental yields in the pension. But then you also have a no tax strategy there. So it's a fantastic one, and as I say, has been performing very well. So we're very pleased on that front. It's also given me security in relation to my own pension, which I have found changed my view on what I owned personally, which I was quite surprised at. But it's amazing when you kind of box off something that maybe might be a concern to you, like your pension, and when you stop working and how you will, have an income and stuff like that. Once you box off that, I suppose, worry, you can then sit back and look at stuff a little bit more constructively, where I was very much keep everything, never sell, and would have probably been very wealthy, but maybe not around to enjoy it. So I have took a different view now on my own stuff personally, and I'm looking at a kind of a yearly audit, which I do anyway, but I think this year is very important, to kind of have a self-audit situation where you sit down, you look at your assets, and you look at how they perform, and you look at the loan to value, you look at the interest rate, you look at, what would be the implications if you were to sell one or two of them. Do you have any capital losses? Can you, like I've actually decided to sell one property where I'm going to have a bit of a loss on that. And I've also decided to sell another property where I'm going to have a gain. And that basically is really just to bolster up the finances and not maybe go for any more borrowing, this year, which I would normally do, but I've decided this year just because you can doesn't mean you should, and sometimes, consolidation is a good thing. And as I say, it is strange how your perspectives can change.
Oh, Christina, there's so much you've said there that I want to unpack. Look, let's start by kind of separating the property from the stocks now, because I don't think it's probably helpful for me now to try and draw comparisons based on a snapshot in time. So like maybe
Yes.
we just focus directly on the property, and there's a lot of what you said there. I love the idea of a self-audit, but before we move on to that, because look, we know there are challenges coming down the track, and they're coming at us faster maybe than we expected. But before we go on to that, what your comments about a pension resonate with me, and I think they'll resonate with women, but I also think they'll resonate with self-employed people, because we know that these are the two classes of people who are less likely to either have a pension or understand, to be fully using their the pension mechanisms that the state has provided. So you talk about a shift in mindset. So very quickly, how do you reconcile that? Can you understand maybe from where you've come from to where you are now? Was there a mental element in terms of tackling pension?
Yes, I definitely think so. I suppose sometimes it may not be rational when we write it down, and that's why I always think the self-audit is a great idea, or even, kind of sit down with somebody that's in property and have a chat and go through everything, and get an overview, or even somebody else to bounce things off, because you can be too close to things yourself. But I think we all sort of maybe would look at things and say, well, look, we need to keep X amount of stuff aside, maybe from an inheritance point of view for our children. We want to look after our children, or we have concerns that when we stop working, that's going to be like a bit of a cliff edge. And when we stop working, all of a sudden we're going to be in a situation where we have to basically, I suppose, finance our retirement and that, So these things can bring us to maybe a little bit of a irrational approach where we just keep everything, sell nothing, work longer, maybe don't retire when we should, or not even retire. I mean, it depends on what age, you achieve that kind of, I call it your FI, your financial independence age. People forget that the pension can be used as a fantastic structure to meet that goal, where maybe you can work on projects that you really love rather than, having to do the 9 to 5, and you can definitely get there a lot quicker through the pension than you can personally, because of the fact that the tax aspect on the rental income, and then even the property is grown in value in the pension, wouldn't have any capital allowances or capital gains tax, so it's really a very fast mechanism, where you could get in at 40 and decide with your pension trustee that you want your retirement age, your financial independence age, to be around the 50 mark. And depending on what type of policy you have, you could be then sitting with your 25% lump sum drawdown and your 4% a year. And you may even go on and work for another 15 years, 20 years, and that's fine. But it's one thing, as you say, kind of doing it because you're worried and you haven't sat down and worked it out and put a plan in place. But it's another thing if you've worked it out and you've ticked all your boxes and you know where you're going, you have a plan, and you're going to reach that goal quicker, and that's going to give you much more advantages, I suppose. I think it's a time and risk, really, and people have said that to me. It's one thing at 35, if you thought you were going into a bit of a downturn and maybe the economy was going to be a bit rocky for 10 to 15 years, that's one thing when you're 35. But when you're 55, if you think the economy is going to go into a bit of a downturn in 15 years, you're coming out the other side of that at 70. They're precious years where you actually want to be able to you know, spend time with your family, you know, and travel and do things while you're healthy and you're able. So it's, I suppose, not to squander those years kind of worrying about things. Get your worries listed,
Yeah.
go
No,
through
listen,
them, look at
I think,
everything,
no,
box them off
I
and
think,
say, now that's done, and enjoy the rest and enjoy your time and enjoy your
yeah.
family, because we're only here the once, you know.
Yeah, look, that's very true. When you talk about financial independence, but I suppose independence is, it's a bit of a, I suppose it's subjective to the person on one level, but you know, in terms of independence, financial independence is really the ability to choose. So as you say, you
Yes.
hit that target and you might choose to work for 15 years, but you're doing it because you're choosing to use as to do it, as opposed to because you have to. Yeah, look, I think that this is a really interesting space, and one that probably our pension mechanisms are not being fully used by people who perhaps ought to be using them. And I think, you know, particularly when you're self-employed, it can always be a case that you're prioritizing, and I'm speaking for myself as well, you're always prioritizing maybe the security of the team as opposed to your personal long-term security, because the needs of the team are in the current financial period, whereas the future always seems that bit further away. But let's move on to the self-audit, because that's really interesting. First, can I ask you, what are your expectations of the market over the next kind of 2 years?
Well, I suppose it's kind of, everybody sort of knows that, you know, things are changing, you know, how much they change. You know, it's kind of crystal ball gazing really, and it's very difficult to know. We're definitely, if you look at the investment clock and you picture 12 o'clock has been the top of the investment market, and you know, we're not there. We've probably passed that, you know, and then 6 o'clock is the bottom. We're not there either, but we're somewhere in between. But it kind of be aware, well, where are we on that investment clock, and where are we at the moment? And that does kind of color, I suppose, your views a little bit. As I say, I kind of do this is kind of a chart type thing where I'd look at the time and risk based on the person's age. I'd look at how the asset maybe is performing. Is it a good asset? Or do they have problems with it? Is there a big roof that needs to be replaced, or a lot of investment down the road, and the rental yields really aren't holding that up, and it's not maybe the next one would be long, you know, part of their long-term plan. Is that property part of your long-term plan? And then what's the loan to value on it? What's the interest rate on it? Did you get a good deal on it in the first place? Because some people got absolutely atrocious deals that really, that the interest rates are very high, and you know, they're maybe a very short term, and they're not good from the get-go, you know. So maybe, you know, look at those ones and stress test your loans. If you're on a low base, maybe on a tracker that's coming in probably at, you know, an original 1% over the ECB, it's now at about 3%. So maybe look at doubling that and say at 6%, if I stress test my buy to let or my few buy to lets, how am I looking? You know, can I weather, you know, any kind of storms coming down the road? And then I suppose you may decide to sell some assets. You know, you need to crunch the numbers. Capital gains tax is a big thing. So did you buy it? Did you build it? How long ago did you buy it? Like very quickly, if you sit down with a pen and piece of paper and work property by property, you're going to see that there are certain assets that if you sold, you'd maybe have a very big tax bill and maybe wouldn't be worth your while selling, you know. So kind of aim to the ones that, you know, that will work. Or maybe you have a capital loss, which people tend to forget about or try to forget about, because they think a loss is an absolutely dreadful thing. Oh my God, we don't think about that property we bought and we lost our shirt on. But, you know, get that back out of the filing cabinet, talk to your accountant. What was the capital loss, and can you bring that capital loss forward against a gain maybe on something that you want to sell now? And then I suppose around the finance, we were coming up with finance for a new project, and we were thinking about borrowing, and then we decided, no, we're not going to borrow, we're actually going to sell two assets. One of them is going to create a loss and one of them is going to create a gain. And then after paying mortgages, etc., we're going to end up with X amount of money that we'll have then to build our new project. And just because you can borrow doesn't mean you should. And that's a very hard one, you know, because I would be constantly year after year after year borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, you know. So you need to know sometimes, you know, that the bank is a great ally to have, and it's great to have them on your side. But, you know, if you think you're going into a bit of a downturn, you really want to be thinking about, you know, how exposed am I here? I don't want to be completely reliant on the bank. You want to have good equity in the properties, and you want to be able to withstand whatever's coming down the track. And I suppose cash is king. It's very hard for investors to put cash into an account and leave it sitting there, and they just think of it as a massive waste. And I would be very much on that side of saying there's a waste now leaving that cash there. It's not making any money and whatever. But if it's giving you security, and as I said, if it's ticking one of those boxes that is making you anxious or worried or has you up at night, at least then you have that there, and it doesn't have to be a lot of money. You can add up sort of what everything is on an expense basis on a year. And if you can aim to put 1 year's money away, now people have said to me, 1 year is nothing. If things go wrong, you're going to be tapping into 1 year very quickly. I said, you will, yes, but things don't disappear overnight. If things start going down, they might go down 25%. And if you have to tap into that 1 year at 25%, that actual 1 year will buy you 4 years of help at 25%, that sort of way. But I did find in the last recession, cash was definitely king, and you just need to be the guy that could hang around the longest, and just still be there, I suppose, really, just, steadfast and be there and just trying to hang on was really the main thing, so. But then that's not to say it's going to be as bad as all that, but let's prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
Christina, every time I talk to you, I genuinely learn so much, and you always get me thinking about things in a slightly different way. And I think it is very reasonable that we know, while we don't know the shape of what the next downturn will look like, it does certainly feel inevitable in some form or other. And I think when it comes to property, there will be very clear winners and there will be very clear losers, but it's not clear yet which is which. And that's something that we're struggling with ourselves at the moment. But listen, you've given me loads to think about. I'd love to touch base. I mean, the idea of the self-audit, that is such a good discipline, and one that maybe everybody knows logically to do, but doesn't sit down to do or doesn't make the time to do, because again, priorities tend to run off the page. But actually, I think that you make a very compelling case that actually now is the time, because it would be a shame for people who experienced losses over the past decade and a half, and I'm not sure I know anybody in this industry who didn't. For those people, it would be a shame to have those losses in vain. There should at least be a learning, and maybe now is the time to apply that learning. And unfortunately, a lot of what's happening at the moment does feel familiar, but at least if we're going in using the learning that was hard gained the last time, it would be a positive step. So look, thank you for being so open. Like, genuinely, it's hard to get a conversation like this going, so genuinely appreciate your time. So my thanks to Christina Buckley, developer and consultant. We need to take a quick break. Stay tuned.